Novara Live viewers, I have smeared a man. It happened on last week's show when we were talking about the row over seasonal workers and immigration. This is what I said. Guy Singh Watson is founder of Riverford Organic Vegetable Company. He told The Guardian this: "The reality of the conditions of many of those who work in the fields picking our food is pretty abhorrent. I really don't like the dependence on foreign workers who are inevitably treated badly. But in reality, to get the fruit and vegetables picked over the next few years, we do need more people coming from abroad to save the industry we have left." Interesting, he says foreign workers will inevitably be treated badly. That's someone who is high up in one of these companies. Maybe he could not treat them badly, I don't know. Maybe the economics doesn't allow it. I assume that's what he'd probably argue. Now, what made me reassess that comment was an email from a Novara Live viewer. They wrote to us on Monday's show. Michael Walker quoted from Riverford CEO Guy Singh Watson talking about foreign workers who are inevitably treated badly. Michael Walker then suggested that maybe Guy Singh Watson could not treat them badly. I kind of assumed that Guy Singh Watson wasn't referring to their own practices at Riverford, but rather other companies, because Riverford seemed to be one of the good guys. I haven't really scrutinised this myself, but they do talk a pretty good game about employee rights and will often lament other people's or others' work practices within the farming industry. I think they are even making moves towards a cooperative model. So that email made me feel kind of bad. Maybe I jumped to conclusions. Then, a couple of days later, a story came out in The Guardian that made me feel really bad. So you can see this here. Veg box firm Riverford to be 100% staff owned as founder sells stake for £10 million. And it says exclusive. Guy Singh Watson says he will continue to be involved in the business and will pay full tax on dividends. So we've got a guy who treats his workers well, and now his company is becoming a worker-owned company. So maybe I got it wrong. Maybe I jumped to conclusions. And earlier today, I spoke to Guy Singh Watson to apologise.
Michael, you don't need to apologise. I don't think I expressed myself very well. I mean, it's not inevitable that people will be exploited. It's just that they normally are. I mean, that just seems to be the way it works out. I don't think the very few non-UK nationals we have working at Riverford are exploited, but on most farms they are.
From your perspective as someone who runs a farm, I mean, how does this immigration debate play into your industry? Are you someone who is reliant on foreign workers to pick fruit and food, or because I suppose you're a bit of a premium product, aren't you, Riverford?
I guess that's true, and some of that premium does go into paying people better, trying to make the world a bit more like the world so many of us want to live in. So that's treating people respectfully, being sensible use of packaging, not air freighting stuff around the world and so on. But that, does often end up being a bit more expensive. And indeed, some of that money we do use to make sure that we pay people properly. So everyone's paid the voluntary living wage and they get a profit share on top of that.
So it came out today, 19% is the level of food inflation. And we talk about it a lot on this show, but we don't often talk to farmers about food inflation. So from your perspective, why are we seeing this right now? There are sort of varying explanations sort of going around. One is sort of people trying to profit maximize and sort of relying or exploiting, let's say, the situation to try and increase their profits. The other is that it's all input costs potentially from the Ukraine war and climate difficulties elsewhere. And then there's also the labour issue. Was it something to do with Brexit? I mean, are your prices going up by 19%? If so, why?
No, they're going up by, I think I'm right in saying 5% next month, and they did go up by 5% last autumn. So that's 10%, and I don't think it was over a year before we had a price increase in that. So we're not running at anything like that. And I think part of the reason is that a much higher proportion of the pound that people spend with Riverford goes back to the grower. And those growers' costs have risen. I mean, labour has gone up in the last 2 years by 20%. Obviously, energy prices have gone up hugely, and you just can't expect to continue squeezing growers and expect them to absorb those costs. So prices must rise, and it's not as if they were making much money before that. So, I think it is inevitable that prices will rise, though it may seem that, there's talk about inflation maybe coming down, but growers haven't had those prices increase over the last 2 years where they've suffered the effect of that inflation. So, I'm afraid you just can't squeeze anymore. I mean, as you'll see, farmers are just not restocking their flocks, whether they're laying or poultry birds, because they can't even pay for the cost of food and labour, let alone the fixed costs associated with maintaining the house and running the chicken house and running their business. So you just can't, it just can't be squeezed anymore, however inconvenient that may be to our current government and their proclamations about bringing inflation down.
And I also wanted to talk to you about another story last week, which is that you're selling your company to the workers. So the people that work at Riverford are going to become the owners. Can you talk about that process? What does that mean? How should we understand what's going on here?
Well, it started about 20 years ago. I've been thinking about it, and 5 years ago, I sold 74% of the business to the now co-owners, then staff, for about a quarter what the accountants told me it was worth. And then 5 years later, I've decided to sell the remaining 26%. Well, actually, it's 23% now. I'll continue working in the business like a co-owner, like everyone else.
This last tranche of shares, let's say, that you've sold, I think has gone for £10 million. Now, is that the market rate that you've sold it to the workers, or was that reduced to some degree as some sort of gesture in favour of worker ownership?
Yeah, no, the last 23% are being sold more or less at the market rate, which has turned out to be, hugely more than I had ever anticipated. The first 74% were sold at about a quarter of the market rate because I didn't want to lumber the business with a lot of debt that would put it under stress and threaten the values that we've always held dear. But I mean, we have got the money in the bank, and I decided to take market value for the last 23%, and of that money, I intend to pay my full rate of tax. So that will reduce it quite substantially, and then most of the remainder is going into various social and environmental projects, which I'll probably spend the rest of my life administering.
What does worker ownership mean in this context? I mean, there are sort of different types of worker ownership, aren't there? So John Lewis is worker owned. We're told it's not a worker co-op, of course, and you'll see elsewhere you get worker cooperatives. What will it mean for Riverford that it's worker owned?
Riverford is quite similar to the John Lewis partnership. I do have some reservations about their model. I think it's a bit cumbersome, a bit clunky in the decision making, and I wanted Riverford to stay, I don't know, a bit more willing to take risks and maybe even occasionally offend people and be an outlier. So we do have a slightly more light of foot system of governance, but broadly it's very similar to the John Lewis in that the shares are held in trust for the benefit of the co-owners, the people who are working in the business at that time. And I think it's a really good model. It gives the co-owners, obviously gives them a share in the profits. The only money that will leave the business will be to them, other than investment. But perhaps even more importantly, it gives them, a degree of agency over their lives. They do ultimately determine the direction that the business goes in, and if they don't like the way it's been run by me and the other directors, they can sack us.
So basically, there's an investors AGM, and the people who have shares in it, or the partners who are the workers, they could sort of say, we don't like the direction of this, we want to hire new directors and fire the current ones. Is that sort of how that mechanism would work?
Not really, no. I mean, it's all on our website if anyone wants to have a look. But there's an elected co-owner council, and they each have their constituencies, and they advise the board on certain decision making. So, for instance, they control pay, they control my pay, and the other directors' pay, everyone's pay. And from that council is elected a board of trustees who have the ability to question the board, and indeed, if they don't like what's going on, to dismiss them.